And I wanted to start today by showing you something here I saw on my CNN news alert feed. Now you got to know that I do search this kind of stuff a lot. So they give me the notifications, and this was, well, you see, 2020 11/10. So that was yesterday. That's the way the Europeans do it. They write it backwards. But at any rate, they found a new Viking ship.
Wait, this year?
Yeah, just recently. And so, looks like you guys can see that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. And I got this ad here that, oh, I didn't want that. And this is a nuisance too. I'll get us where we need to be. There. And so archaeologists in Norway find rare ship burial using only radar. And so this is what I was telling you about Sutton Hoo, which was in the last chapter. And it was a Viking ship site. And how do I get rid of this? So there we go. And so this is what the radar looked like. I was telling you about how Viking burials for elite people, especially like the captain of a ship, it would be buried with their ship and all kinds of stuff. That's where we're finding a lot of the belt buckles and purse covers and so on.
That's on the sea?
I'm sorry.
Is that on the sea?
No, it's actually on land.
Oh.
Ground penetrating radar technology. And one of the things too, I should add, is that they did dig big holes to put all of this stuff in. But usually this thing, because they've displaced so much dirt, kind of looks like a mound too. So that's, but they found this because they knew where to look. And this is the story. Norwegian archaeologists have identified a previously undiscovered high status Viking burial site, including a feast hall, a cult house, and remnants of a ship burial, which is what I was talking about. Now, the feast hall, if you guys ever watch these Viking films or Viking games, they'll show like a long table and they bring out a roast pig and all kinds of stuff, and they gorge themselves like a bunch of slobs, you know. But that is what you would call a feast hall. A cult house is something that translates into a chapel or a church. And so anyway, they were able to find all of this without using any hands. They didn't have to dig. And so next paragraph, I want to show you this. Key amongst the findings from the Norwegian Institute for Cultural Heritage Research, published Tuesday in the Antiquity. Antiquity is the name of the journal. And so a lot of times when, and this is pertinent to your research too, if you find something that might be NBC, Fox News, CNN, something, if it's legit, they will cite where that information is from. And so this is legit. This Antiquity is a peer-reviewed journal. And if you look that up, in the library, we probably have access to that. And secondly, you would find out a lot more about this too. And so it was located on the Gel Mount in Gjellestad, southeastern Norway. Boats symbolize safe passage into the afterlife, usually according to the elite of Viking society. I got a question for you here. Is this kind of like what the Egyptians did?
It could be, because it's similar.
It's similar in a way and kind of different in a way. They're not putting a pyramid, or they don't have the Valley of the Kings and stuff. But bottom line is that they, like the Egyptians, believed that the dead could pass into an afterlife. And as such, they needed to have some things. There's a little bar graph here, a little map. And so they have a bunch of, they have this all mapped out. And this is the ship. And then it has some other sites here that are at least part of this burial site. And you can see that here. And they don't really know what's in there, but they're going to dig it up. And so data shows various mounds picked, as I was saying, a mound picked up by the radar, including the big oval-shaped one that researchers identified as a Viking age ship. After initial tests were conducted, efforts to fully evacuate the ship are now underway. So that is in the news. And I want to give you this to think about. You know, there's a lot of stuff in here. If you get a chance, I got the link for you. Vikings weren't necessarily blonde or Scandinavian. Why everything you thought you knew about Norsemen may be wrong. And we were just talking about that, about red hair and being taller, stronger. Well, that's another thing they're doing. They're looking at DNA, and they're finding, they know what the human genome is, and they know what genes produce red hair, blonde hair, dark hair, whatever. So they're finding out that probably much of what we thought we knew is probably not true. And so my pitch to you is this: if you like this kind of stuff, there are jobs out there for you. If you study art history, and especially if you study some other related subject. And so if you take physics and you learn about ground penetrating radar on the one hand, and you know about Viking history, you could be doing this. If you know how to write, all the better. Then you can publish in the journals. But they need a lot of different people that can read genetics. They need people that can do tests to find out, like radiocarbon test and stuff like that. So anyway, it is a viable subject and potentially a prosperous career. So that's my pitch. And we're going to go share this one here. And so, see, one of the things I have here is that sometimes my cursor does not show up here, which makes it kind of resume slideshow. There we go. So can you guys see this? Romanesque architecture. Let me check. Should be that one. How's that? Romanesque Europe. Brooke, you got it on there?
I do not have it up. I can pull it up real quick. I see it.
Oh, okay. So you guys at home can see this on Zoom?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good. And so I want to talk to you about Romanesque Europe. And this is that time pretty much right after the time where we left off. And I showed you how dismal things were in early medieval Europe. And there was a power vacuum. There was not a particularly well-organized government, standing armies and stuff like that. So this is the chapter where Europe gets its act together. And so, as such, I got this map here, and I want to tell you a little bit about it. See, the Norman Kingdom, this is what is left by the descendants of the Vikings. And what we're talking about is a century, 2, 3 after the Vikings came in, and they basically intermarried. They assimilated. They were part of the culture. And so this was called the Norman Kingdom. And you can see it actually extends into northern France. Do I have any World War II buffs in here?
My great uncle.
Yeah, good thing. Veterans Day.
Oh, yes, today, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. That's like
yeah, I appreciate veterans. You bet. This day, or I should say, D-Day, June 6, 1944, is what we call D-Day, and it is where the Allied troops invade Europe from the west, and the beaches they land on are called, this place is called Normandy, which is a leftover, a carryover from being part of the former Norman Kingdom. And so anyway, it's modern day, it's France, and this is modern day England, this is modern day Scotland, and modern day Ireland. And so this is 1100, the beginning of the 12th century. And we see France has kind of gotten its act together as a country. The Holy Roman Empire has consolidated. The Iberian Peninsula here, which is Spain and Portugal, is still kind of divided between being part of the Muslim world, which is the Umayyad Caliphate, and the Kingdom of Leon and Castile. And so that's it. And what you see here on this map, they show this. This is really kind of interesting. What we find is that the population in Europe at this time becomes much more mobile. They can move. They don't stay in the same place. And so these are pilgrimage routes to northern Spain, Santiago Compostela. And so anyway, but they go through a lot of these same places where what will happen is we'll see the emergence, the building of churches along the way. And so One of the things I'd like to kind of point out too, long-lasting effects of this organization, this kind of government, these countries in Europe. I just talked about World War II just a moment ago. Well, this becomes England, France, Spain, Portugal. This is Germany. This is Italy. Well, later on, in about 400 years, around 1500, these countries, England, France, Spain, and Portugal, they have navies. They have it together. They go out and they conquer the world. They colonize the world. The English, they colonized the eastern part of North America, which ended up being the original 13 colonies. The Spaniards conquered much of South America and much of North America. The French, well, the French conquered right where we're at. The French owned the middle of the continent plus Canada. And in South America, the Portuguese and the Spanish kind of split the difference. They actually had the Pope intervene in a dispute of what they could colonize. And so the Pope drew a line, a vertical line, north-south, and everything on the east side of it could be Portugal's. Everything on the west could be Spanish. And so that's why, even to this day, Brazilians speak Portuguese, while much of the rest of South America speaks Spanish. And so, anyway, these guys did not colonize. They were kind of, in terms of building navies and armies and stuff, they were kind of backwards. So by the 20th century, by the time 800 years from now, 1900, they're kind of way behind. They don't have any colonies. Their economies suffer. And that's partly what caused the Second World War. These people were not in the game. They didn't have colonies. And so their economies were backwards and they wanted to break out. Anyway, bottom line.
I didn't know that. I thought it was like Russia.
Yeah, and Russia has its own, Russia is over here behind Poland. But one of the things about Russia was that it is its own empire, because from the eastern part, which is modern day Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states, they go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So they have, in their own way, their own colonies. Siberia, some of the eastern countries that are now countries again. But anyway, so it does, it's we're seeing things that result in modern history, the way modern history plays out. And so, as I was saying, these people were mobile. I have this Gisselbertus, West Tympanum of Saint-Lazare in Autun, France, 12th century. So as those countries emerge, one of the things that they do, like I said, is that they build cathedrals. This is kind of one of the characteristics. Some of the early cathedrals are actually on the same grounds as some of the monasteries or abbeys, and in part because those places were kind of far away from the population centers, but they were also far away from potential invaders too. So they kind of had this thing anyway. So I'll show you this, and I'm hoping that you could recognize some of the iconography. And so we have all of these people here, and they are all different kinds of people doing different kinds of things. And in some way, this is kind of Egyptian. The Egyptians like to do pictures of people farming wheat and doing other kinds of things. But when you get above this line, this is Jesus, and it is the last judgment. And at the last judgment, this is when Christ returns, the people on his right will go to heaven, and the sinners will be cast into hell. And so this is Jesus, and this is Judgment Day. And so we know it's Jesus partly because of that halo we've been talking about. He doesn't have the book. He's not making the gesture of peace, but he's doing something quite different here. One of the things that you can see in this tympanum is that we're starting to see words come up in just select places, right across here, around the Christ figure. And to be sure, literacy was not at a high level, but they talked about Giselbertus, this guy who made this, as being so good that the illiterate could read the stone, that this would make sense even if you did not know the words or couldn't read the words. And so that's part of it. And Giselbertus, there's something noteworthy about that. Just the fact that we know his name. When we were seeing those icons from the Byzantine Empire, we're just talking about where we found them. There wasn't any indication of who made this. And so the artists start to emerge. We start to know who they are. And this is something that really starts to separate the Romanesque period from the previous periods, the Dark Ages, because we have a lot of written accounts of how they built these cathedrals, who built them, what was going, how much it cost, and everything. And so I put this in. It's not in the book. St. Louis delivering the crown of thorns. This is my segue into the Crusades. One of the things that happens, it starts in 1090 and lasts for about 100 years, is that the Europeans are doing these crusades. There were 3 major crusades, and they went to the Holy Land, and their mission was to protect the Holy Land from all of these other people that were non-Christian, mainly Muslims. And so that was part of it. And the other part was that they wanted to retrieve all of the relics they could possibly get from the Holy Land. So you guys know what a relic is?
A relic?
Yeah.
Can you put in a sentence?
It's a what?
Can you put in a sentence? Like, can you put relic in a sentence?
Oh, use relic. I got you. I'm so old that people call me a relic.
Oh, God.
That's not much of a clue. A relic is this. A relic is an artifact from the past.
Okay.
And so that if somebody like calls me a relic, that means I'm living in 1950 or something. I'm a relic. But the thing is that the crown of thorns would be a relic from the crucifixion. And by the way, the Crusades, we call them the Crusades, and it has the root word from the same root word as crucifixion. And a crucifix in Latin is crucifixus, which means fixed to the cross. Jesus fixed to the cross. And the Crusaders, they were after relics, but probably the most important relic was the cross of Christ.
Was the relics a bad thing?
No, relics are things that connect people to these holy people. And so the crown of thorns, look at this. This is St. Louis, the guy for whom our fair city is named, Louis the Ninth. And this is the crown of thorns, and it's in a gold container, and he has his crown on. This is by the way, a stained glass piece, but I brought it in to kind of show you, since these people were actually much more mobile, they were traveling to the Near East and invading and stealing a lot of stuff, and they were in search of artifacts of Christianity. So, how about a bad example? Monty Python's Search for the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the cup that Christ used at the Last Supper to drink wine and share with his disciples. And for a long time, people have theorized that still exists somewhere.
The Holy Grail?
The Holy Grail, yes. And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of very deep conspiracy theories and stuff about Jesus' life and so on. But that's what the Monty Python comedy group were sort of making fun of, and they were talking about this period in time, the Crusades and so on.
So the Holy Grail have not been found yet?
No. And there are, every once in a while, somebody will come up with a theory that they know where it's at. The last was that it is in a chapel in southern Poland, and they think it's buried underneath the chapel. So
Is it just like the movie Da Vinci Code?
I was going to say that. Yes, that's exactly the kind of conspiracy things that we're talking about. Very elaborate.
A more theory that I heard of in terms of the Holy Grail, and that it might technically be the descendant or blood of Jesus, as he was depicted as with a child in among the Crusades, and it was thought that they brought it or the family to America to hide them.
Yeah, that is a theory. And there's you're right, Cammie. That is so on point. There's another, there are many, many theories. One is, and this goes with the Da Vinci Code, but that Mary Magdalene had a child with Jesus. And she got out of the Middle East when Christ was crucified and took a boat to southern France. And there she had brought her Christ baby. She was sort of a bishop in the early church. And that lineage is what the Da Vinci Code is all about. That's why they are in France trying to figure out And I thought that was really kind of cool in that movie, where the woman who was the descendant of Christ actually had healing powers. Yeah, well, that's in the book, I mean. But yeah, complicated, centuries old. And that's really what they were doing 900 years ago. And so this is a reliquary. This is how I'm leading into this. A reliquary, which is a container for relics. And so this is Saint Foy, this is Saint Faith in English. And basically some monks robbed her tomb and they took her skull, and her skull is in here. That's in the book, actually. And that is the relic that is in here. And a relic in the church, things that would be in a reliquary would be any bones. Or as Cammie was saying, the blood, they would say vials of blood from the saints.
Why?
Because they were holy. They were venerated. What we have is this ancestor worship of all of that's why we call them saints, by the way, because they are holy ancestors. They are examples of true Christianity. And so this is, and they would do this would be elaborate, have as many precious stones, gold, silver, everything. And it is an image of Saint Foy. And this is her reliquary, the reliquary again being the container. And so you'll find this a lot, and this is late 10th century, early 11th century. So we're smack dab right there where we were talking about time-wise. And what happens here, like I say, they're out for relics. That's kind of a big deal. I have to tell you, I was brought up a Catholic. So a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about is still really central to Catholicism. But we used to get, for instance, when I was a child, get holy cards, and in the holy card would be like a little piece of cloth. And that cloth was considered a relic because somebody had touched that cloth to one of the relics of a saint. And the saint would be pictured on the front part of the card. The back would be saying, this is a relic from Saint Foy. And they give a little bit of her bio life story. And so that's what they were after. And that's not a new thing. When Constantine made Byzantium his capital, called it Constantinople, and sent his mother to Jerusalem to find as much in the way of artifacts, relics from Christianity. And she brought back a lot of stuff, and she identified a lot of spots. She was the one that identified where the Holy Sepulchre is. That was her. She brought back things like splinters from the true cross. Now, experts will agree or disagree about some of the authenticity of the relics. But in this case, Saint Foy was right there in France. They knew where she was buried. And so that one was contemporary. And so I got this. This is the interior of Saint Etienne. And it's one of the early Romanesque cathedrals. We call this style of architecture Romanesque, and we call this period Romanesque because there are a lot of indicators that these people drew quite heavily from Roman culture. And so the architecture with the archways and the columns and stuff, very much Roman. Their language, by the way, is Romantic, at least for the countries of France, Spain, and Portugal, and Italy. Those 4 languages are based on Latin. And so that's, you would put these things, keep going with it. That's why they call South America Latin America, because they speak Romantic or Latin languages. And so anyway, the architecture is heavily influenced by Roman architecture. And I brought this, I put a star on it for this reason. Early on, they made the roofs out of wood. And that'll change. They'll use barrel vaulting and other kinds of things. They'll carve the roof and this upper part of the structure in stone. And so this is the floor plan. This is yet another Romanesque church, St. Vincent, Cardona, Spain. And again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but folding chairs. That's something you don't see here. This has pews installed, but likely it had no seats. And so, and this is the interior of St. Philbert in Tournos, France. And you can see this is called vaulting. When you put archways up high and they support the structure, that is a Roman vault. And so St. Sernin from Toulouse, France. And one of the things that happens at this time is when you have a holy person and they die, and oftentimes martyred, they'll build the cathedral right where this person died. And so that is the case of St. Sernin. And one of the things that happens at this time was that we're getting into the 1100s. They start making the building look like the shape of a cross. And so that is something that will last a long time as well. This is the Church of St. Foy. And again, building cathedrals in honor of the saints who lived and died there. And so this is the interior of St. Sernin. And again, the folding chairs, but you can see, we're starting to see this develop. We don't see the wood. We see that it's basically stone. And here is another artist who did a lot of this sculpture, Bernardus Galundis. I don't know how to say that, I'm sorry. Bottom line, there's Christ in majesty, got all of the trappings. We have the halo, we have the blessing, we have the Bible. And so what happens here in this late medieval period and the Romanesque period is that sculpture makes a big comeback. And so a lot of things that we see This is all architecture, but I'll show you. Sculpture, low relief and freestanding sculpture. Christ in majesty. And there's Christ giving the blessing, holding the Bible. Got the halo. And in this case, he's wearing robes fit for an emperor or a king. And again, we see the words and we see the imagery. This is a lintel over the doorway, and a lintel, as we talked about, is the top of the doorway. It's the beam that goes across the open space. Christ, doubting Thomas, and the apostles, Santo Domingo, Spain. I want to show you guys this because some of you may know it, some may not. Who knows the story about St. Thomas? Armani, you got it? I
It's
know.
top of my head. He was there with Jesus, right?
Yeah, he was one of the 12 disciples.
Oh, I thought it was 4. I thought it was 4 disciples. I thought it was like Mark, John.
Well, those are the ones that wrote the Gospels,
Oh.
but there were some other ones like St. Peter and St. James and so on. But Thomas, what happens in this part of the Bible is that Christ is crucified, and then on the 3rd day, he is resurrected from the dead, and the apostles hear stories about Jesus is still alive, and he finally meets with them. And they are astounded. They're very happy, but it's miraculous. They've witnessed a miracle. And so the word got back to Thomas because he was the one disciple who was not there.
Oh, man.
And so when he heard about it, he said, nah, this didn't happen. If he's still here, I'm going to put my fingers in that wound on his side, which is where the Roman soldier speared him while he was on the cross. And that is what he's doing here. It's where the apostles all got together, and here is Thomas. And Jesus said to Thomas, oh, I heard you want to put your fingers in my wound. And he did. And so anyway, it's a story about faith and believing things that maybe you don't see. And there's a phrase that spawned from this part of the Bible. Doubting Thomas. You see somebody that's just a natural born skeptic, you say, that's a doubting Thomas. It's after St. Thomas, the apostle. And so, and one of the things I talked about before was that a lot of these cathedrals and other buildings were connected to monasteries. And so this is such a place. Historiated capital, and that's what this is. And this is the general view, but this is what those capitals look like. It's not Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. It's its own thing. And it's at the cloister of Saint Pierre in Moissac, France. And so a cloister is a group of religious people who don't have contact with the outside world. As I said before, my wife worked for the Carmelite monastery in Ladue, and they are cloistered. So they don't contact the outside world. They have somebody like my wife take care of business for them. Pay the electric bills, and they make stuff and they sell it, prayer cards and rosaries and things. Anyway, Abbot Durandus on a pier in the cloister, the same place, have some words. He's given a blessing, but he doesn't have the Christ halo. And on this side, he has what is considered to be a shepherd's, what do you call that? A shepherd's crock? Anyway, it is a staff symbolizing being a shepherd. And a bishop or an abbot would be considered a shepherd of his flock, of the people in the cloister, for example. Another thing I want to point out, this is still Romanesque, and it is in a lot of ways very Roman. One of the things that happens in this time is that you start seeing the same names of cathedrals recurring. This is Notre Dame in Fontenay, France.
Is that the one that got burned down?
No, that's why I'm telling you this. The one that got burned down, we'll take a look at on Monday, but it is Notre Dame, and there's a bunch of Notre Dames, and even in this country, we have, of course, we say it Notre Dame. We have college, Notre Dame, got a high school, Notre Dame, many high schools, Notre Dame. And so, yeah. Did you go to Notre Dame, by the way?
No.
Oh,
I
okay.
just know people that went there. And
Well, my sister-in-law is the president. And if you get any, go on the website, say, Megan Bohack. Just saying. And so here, South Portal of St. Pierre and the tympanum, again, we'll zoom in, but it's kind of the same formula. We have the little less important people here, and we have more important people, saints and angels, and here it is, Christ giving the blessing, holding the Bible. So this iconography, this is why I wanted you to see that and know that. This is Notre Dame La Grande. And so out of this Romanesque, we start to see the beginnings of what we will on Monday talk about as Gothic cathedrals. But as you can see, they spared no expense. They really made quite elaborate places of worship. This is from South Portal of St. Pierre. What you see here too is this is kind of common outside the jams, which is the outside of this. We have almost a kind of standard of showing the apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Christ up in the place of honor. And we also have usually some kind of story relating to the person or saint that the cathedral was named for. And so Gisselbertus, we saw him before. This is Pentecost and the mission of the apostles. That's the event that we were talking about where doubting Thomas was not there. And so this is an interesting sculpture. I mean, this is an interesting It is a fort. It is architecture. It is, and it is in Syria.
It looks like a castle.
It is a castle. That's exactly what it is. It's a fortification. And one of the things that happens with the Crusaders is that they build fortifications along the way to the Holy Land. And they did that for self-preservation. A standing army out in the middle of a field would be very vulnerable, but they had the wherewithal to build castles and forts along the way. And so after the Crusades are over, these places still function to protect the trade routes, but we see trade blossom after the Crusades. And so this is what enriches Europe, trade. And I've said this before, I am a capitalist, and when people buy and sell and trade with each other, a lot of good things happen. Wealth is created, and that wealth can be used to raise the standard of living and so on. But anyway, this is one of those Crusader forts. And check this out. This is the way in, and you see it looks almost like one of the aqueducts, the way that it's built, that bridge.
Where's the door?
I know, that's what I'm wondering too. It's probably been sealed off. And I'm not sure that any of this was used as a fort for probably 400 or 500 years. And if you see up here, this is a tourist site. And so people are kind of looking around. And I got to tell you, there are some similar kinds of structures here in the United States. How many of you have ever been to St. Augustine? It's a Spanish outpost in the Spanish colony of Florida. And it's a structure that's actually in a lot of ways very similar to this. And so they were trying to hang on to their territory. They built the fort just like they were doing in the Middle East and so on. Jesselbertus, suicide of Judas. And if you know the story of the crucifixion, Judas was the one who sold Jesus out, and he was so ashamed and so guilt-ridden that he went and hung himself. He tried to give the money back and say, "Give me back, Jesus, I don't want your money." Yeah, too bad, Judas. And so anyway, and you have this depiction of satanic angels influencing the story as part of the narrative too. Jesselbertus, Eve. One of the things that happens here, and this is kind of an interesting thing, because the artist and the clerics, those religious scholars, they had some problems trying to figure out how to portray Adam and Eve. And for these Christians at this time, as we saw on Monday, we saw the illuminated manuscript by the manuscript illuminator from Italy, and he's actually giving you the story, but how to deal with nudity. And so this is not like the kind of nudity that you'd see in, say, ancient Greece, where the bodies are very, very natural and glorify the human body. These start to kind of be a little bit more modest and a little bit more ashamed of their nudity. And so anyway, and so more illuminated manuscripts. And the initial L, we saw the initial P from the Book of Kells, and it had that guy's head on the P. Anyway, we don't really know everything about what the iconography is. There's a lot of speculation. And so I wanted to show you this one and the next one. And this one I put the star by. But what you start to see emerge in the pictures are dragons. And that's what's happening here. Saint Mark being tormented by a dragon. And this is the same period of time where we have the story of Saint George, who killed the dragon that was, and this, I'm not exactly sure how to explain this, but the bottom line is that up until this time, we don't see dragons as part of Christianity. Yeah, they're not really mentioned in the Bible so much, but it is part of what's happening here. Dragons, and dragons as sort of a stand-in for the devil.
Right.
And so the initial R with knight fighting dragons. And here's the knight. Here's a poor soul holding up the knife and he's actually putting the spear through this dragon.
Look at his face.
I know. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I put this in there more, because it is a significant change in the iconography. And it's basically from the Romanesque period. Here's some examples of Romanesque painting above the Tower of Babel on the painted vault. And see, this is kind of an interesting thing too, because right here we see Christ. And we see the Tower of Babel, which in the Old Testament, God took offense and destroyed the Tower of Babel, saying it was sinful. But that was centuries before Christ. But, you know, and Christ in majesty in the apse, which would be like above the altar. And again, the iconography, this is a blue robe, but it may have been purple at one time. We got the cross in the halo, the gesture of forgiveness, peace, and a blessing, and the Gospels in the book, the Bible. And so a lot of things stay the same. We see over here, perhaps yet another dragon. But I want to point this out too. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And so it's not just the Egyptian culture or the Mesopotamian cultures or the Roman and Greek cultures. It's kind of like any place that has precious artwork. People will come in and they'll take the whole wall if they have to. And here's another example of that, Virgin and Child, the Morgan Madonna. And it is a gift from J. Pierpont Morgan, financier, American, late 19th, early 20th century. J.P. Morgan, banker, American capitalist, American millionaire when millionaire meant something. And so he has this. This is from the second half of the 12th century. It's from France. And he bought it and donated it to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So they're not always stolen. Sometimes people pay money for this. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. The arms are broken on the Christ child. And this arm would have been holding the Bible. This arm would be offering a blessing. And she is enthroned. She is sitting on a throne. And the idea has a dual meaning. Again, just like the iconography from the Byzantine era. It means that she's noble and she is in the elite among Christians. And it also signifies wisdom. Thrones, wisdom, synonymous. And so some of the best architecture of the era actually comes out of Germany. And as you can see, it's pretty much like everything else, except what we have is much more ornamentation. And you see these these pews are more like picnic tables. And so from Milan, Italy, Hildegard of Bingen, a whole, I talked to you guys about how the Christians blamed original sin on women, and they were at fault for the original sin. What we start to see emerge out of this time is the acknowledgement that there are holy women in their midst. And so this is a detail of a facsimile, which means it's a copy. And it was lost in 1945, by the way. And Hildegard of Bingen is one of the great holy women of the era. And so I wanted to add this. It was lost in 1945, but that does not necessarily mean it won't be found. During World War II, I'm back on World War II again. Maybe it's Veterans Day, I don't know. But people steal stuff like crazy. Every once in a while you find that some guy died, and in his attic, they find a Rembrandt or some other kind of precious artifact. So we're kind of hoping, maybe against hope, but that this will surface. And we have these things here too. The coronation of Henry and Matilda is from Germany, and this is placing the crowns on Henry and Matilda and Christ overseeing, along with his saints and angels above them. And I put this on there too, Saint Alexander. And if you take a close look, you can see it says Alexander. And so this is the head, and it is from Brussels, which is kind of right next to Normandy, where we were talking about, but a reliquary. It is what was going on. And we have late medieval in Italy. And so this is the cathedral. There's the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And this is a baptistry. And bottom line, a baptistry is a separate building, separate from the cathedral, and it's a place where people get baptized. And there is the Leaning Tower of Pisa, pizza. Yeah. Anyway, it's historic. It kind of has a lot to do with Italian history, Galileo being part of that and so on. And they recently, well, within the last 20 years, they had put a foundation under it because it was actually leaning too much. It was in danger of falling over, but they think they have that fixed. And so this is a Florentine baptistry, the building for baptisms. And I put this on there too, because this is a Florentine church, and it starts to demonstrate not so much all of the saints and angels in statues, but it starts to go back to geometry. And that is an important thing. So, and so let's see. Wanted to show you this quickly. It's called a flying buttress, a quadrant arch holding up the side of the building. And it's time. So that's what I got, and I'm going to let you go. Any questions? Any comments? I'll see you guys next week. Have a good weekend. And so, good. I do.